Rhino, do you copy? Over.
Loud and clear, Easy Rhino.
Do we have a gig? Over.
Start the music.
Welcome back to another episode of the Growing Up Punk Podcast, a podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. If you would like to hear and see more about the show and the bands that we cover, then you can go to growingpunkpod.com. There you will find access to everything you need to become a part of this community. So thanks so much for checking us out, for taking the time to listen. We really appreciate it. We love seeing your comments and your interactions online. And so please keep that coming because that's what kind of fuels this show. We love getting to talk about bands that were really impactful to us and their influence on us. We also love to share that with others. And so thanks for being a part of that. We've got a really cool interview today with the drummer from the band Cartel. His name is Kevin, and he was kind enough to take the time out of his busy schedule to catch up with me and to talk music and drumming and all sorts of stuff. So this one was kind of a different interview. I kind of decided to take a bit of a different approach with this one. So instead of kind of going through the whole, how did the band get started and all that kind of stuff, I decided to kind of just focus on 10 questions that would kind of cover the span of their whole time as a band. If you would like to hear more about kind of the formation of Cartel and some of the things that went into their band, then I've heard their singer Will on a few other podcasts. He was on the Lead Singer Syndrome podcast, and he was also just recently on the Wasting Time podcast. So 2 podcasts that we love here at the show, so go check those out if you want to get more background info. But I just thought it'd be fun to especially talk to a fellow drummer, which Kevin was and is. And so we got to talk about drums and the band and touring and all sorts of different experiences. And there's a lot of really cool stuff in here. And so I'm excited for you get to listen to this. And so thanks for listening. Again, if you like what we're doing, then go and check us out online, rate us, leave a comment, connect with us. We love all that stuff. And it helps the show grow. And so we really appreciate that. But that's enough from me. Here is my interview with Kevin from the band Cartel. Yeah, so on today's interview, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Like instead of, I had mentioned you, like kind of instead of doing that, lots of times, especially when it's with someone from a band that's been around, as long as a band like Cartel has, we kind of go through, how did you, get into music and kind of all that. But I don't know, I just kind of wanted to do something different. And you being a drummer, I'm a drummer myself, and so I always like to take that opportunity to kind of talk some drums in there too. So so we're kind of gonna do kind of 10 questions with Kevin. So it'll be it might seem a little sporadic, but trying to kind of cover different ground, without kind of getting into the whole history and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully there'll be lots of interesting stuff in there because I like I'm a big music fan, so I like all the kind of nerdy stuff that, I'm sure there's other people like me that like to hear, like, well, let's talk about this tour or that tour, and then some people want to know a lot more about like songwriting or, how did you come up with this and that. So anyways, we'll kind of touch on a bunch of things, but I did want to start by asking kind of what was the moment or experience that made you want to play drums, and not necessarily kind of how you got into drums, but what made you want to like pursue it more than a hobby? Like at what point did you know, like, okay, like I want to put my all into this and this is what I want to do?
Sure. I always say that like I didn't have a choice with drums. Like I felt like drums chose me, not to sound like cliche. Yeah. But like I didn't come from a family of drummers, and as much as I have musicians in my family, no one was a drummer. So it wasn't passed down. It wasn't, around. I just gravitated and was mesmerized by drums. I thought it was just the coolest thing in the world. And I think by being exposed to music through the church, it was just kind of around at a young age, but yet I didn't pick it up until I was a little past 13. But I think what I remember as a kid, I remember, so it would have been Metallica's Wherever I May Roam video. I remember being on like vacation sometime around like 10. And I was like, and I remember like Lars Ulrich sort of playing drums to that song in an arena with no one in it. And I just thought that was like just this massive drum set. And he's just in this, they're just, they're in buses and they're traveling. And it, was like pre-show footage and then during show footage. And I was just like, whatever all of that is, that's for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I just because you really hadn't, I don't think I knew what arena tours were. I don't think I knew what, like, much of the logistics layouts and the movements of touring was, but I saw some of it on that. And I just thought it was like, it was kind of one of those summers where I remember watching some of those videos on, MTV and was like, okay, this is something that could happen, but I'm intrigued.
Yeah, and at that point, were you playing with people yet, or you were just kind of getting into drums yourself?
I wasn't even a drummer.
Oh, okay.
I didn't even play at that point. This was probably 3 years before I even played. I think I do remember sitting behind the first friend I had that had a drum set was probably 2 years after, seeing those videos, sitting behind a drum set. I can still vividly remember sitting behind it and not knowing how to play it. Like just not knowing anything about it. It would be another year and a half, almost 2 years before I got my first kit. And all I did was sort of sit down in the basement of my parents' house and just go, well, that sounds like that. And that sounds like that. And just try to put it together. And to fast forward, I think once I could play and was playing with individuals, you kind of always hope like, well, man, we're gonna be rock stars. And you hope that something like an opportunity could present itself for you to make the leap of faith it would take to pursue a career. And that did ultimately happen for us. So, I think I don't know if there was ever a big moment in my, adolescence that said, okay, I have to make this happen. Yeah. I think that kind of always was an underlying emotion. Once you had felt, the substantial, any of the emotions and feelings of playing with a group and having a band and then going to shows, you were like, oh, I totally want to be on the other side of it.
Yeah. Cartel is far from a Metallica sounding band. So kind of, just in between, lots happen kind of, in between hearing Metallica and playing with Cartel. How did, maybe just briefly, how did kind of your musical understandings or interests, kind of shift in there from hearing and seeing something like Metallica to kind of more the pop punk side of things?
Sure. I think your sound is always influenced by what you grew up listening to, by probably what was played around you from your parents, and then kind of what you gravitate towards, in your youth, like, between 13 and 18, whatever you are, as you're discovering music for yourself. So, growing up and hearing, these 80s and 90s pop ballads, or, hearing all these soft pop. Like anything from Celine Dion in the 90s was just some of the most, like rock, not rock ballad, but just these pop melodies where melody was so influential.
Yeah.
But then, like growing up playing any underground punk stuff that was pretty aggressive. And I think the first band that kind of combined soft, or good melody on sort of punkish music was something like A Newfound Glory for a lot of us. And I think that was when you took some of these underground punk, basement show style musical elements, and you combined a more cleaner melodic vocal to it. And I think that when you were like, okay, this something about a clean vocal will always be pop biased to me or influential to me. So I was like, okay, you just combine some of this and clean it up a little, like maybe take some of the rough edges away from it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how you got to Cartel. And I think a lot of us grew up that way. We grew up kind of riding around with our moms and hearing, what 90s pop was. And it's hard not to take those influences and kind of turn them around in your later, or early adulthood to your musical influences.
Yeah, and what's really cool about that is, nobody who would listen to Cartel would say, "Oh, this reminds me of Celine Dion." Or at least I never had those. But it's cool how those undertones kind of come in, right? Where it's like, "Oh, but I remember this, this kind of harmony or vocal from this, and I'm going to now put it over, crunchy guitars." And so much of that just kind of goes from one to another. That's really cool.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that it's a Celine Dion, or Boys to Men, or Mariah Carey thing, but at its core, those were the pop elements at the time, and I feel like melodies always ruled the world, and then kind of behind that has been the guitar, and somehow you can't necessarily take away some of the biggest pop songs of all time being the common denominator, to certain influences.
Yeah. Well, I wish I would have seen a Cartel CD that said Celine Dion meets Metallica. What you get is Cartel.
Yeah, I think you take teenage angst and then you take something that you might not have appreciated at the time, and you go back and look at it, and, hearing certain pop songs when they were present, like in their most present form, like, hearing that song when it was just being released and sort of knowing this might be a hit for the rest of time.
Yeah.
But it's something that I'm sure you kind of then get a little space for it, and you're like, well, not only was it great then, it's great now. I have an understanding and an appreciation of it even more so.
Yeah.
And then so you take what you grew up listening to, and then you take even the classics before those classics, and then you kind of melt that into a pot, and it's the influences can run so deep and so wide and so vast that all of a sudden it becomes its own brand. Yeah,
man, that's really well said. I like just thinking of those different things that encompass influence and, artists that you just never think of. So that's awesome. Besides Lars, what were some of your other earlier influences as a drummer? Like, how did you find other drummers? Was it just watching MTV? When did you
I think I'd have to say, I think a lot of the guys that I tried to play no one would ever know. I think the drummer from Hot Water Music was one that I loved to learn those songs. A lot of stuff I tried to play, no one's ever heard. I think from a mainstream perspective, Dave Grohl's probably my spirit animal, as he is for a lot of people.
Yeah, so good.
I think he's someone that played his intensity was something that I think I played a lot like, and Foo Fighters was something that was probably happening under my nose as I was starting to get into music, and you couldn't ignore I don't know, just all of the way he's played and the stuff he did on Queens of the Stone Age, and just that style of drumming is very me. It's not difficult, but I would say it is with intent.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
And with confidence. So kind of an underplaying with power, if you will. You probably underplay in the part,
right?
But probably overplay in the intensity. And I think that's kind of when has been my sweet spot.
Yeah. I mean, like I've only seen you play live once, but on videos and stuff, I've always loved, drummers like yourself and other drummers in your genre that, cause like pop punk or punk drumming can kind of be like kind of wussy, or it can be, really like intentional. I don't mean wussy like light, but it can be like,
Sure.
just play the whatever. But when you add like when you're like driving into the drums and in the cymbals and hitting hard, like I don't know, it just adds such a cool dynamic to it. And so you're also a left-handed drummer, right?
Yeah, I started as I always played so that my top part of my body, so my hands have always been left, but I switched my feet 5 years into playing. So I was playing open-handed on a right-handed layout.
Oh.
So I had a left-handed upper body and a right-handed lower body by design, and it wasn't something that I was ambidextrous from an upper body standpoint to turn open-handed playing like truly. So like I had an open-handed style, but I still had my hi-hat was on my left side, but so was my ride, so was my crash, so was everything. And you start running out of room, and at least from a rhythm perspective, from your left hand, but then you start thinking, okay, if I'm filling to my right side, I still have to come back to my left to sort of pick up where I'm going from a rhythm side. And it was just, not only did it look funny, but it was partially difficult to play. And I think that I saw that I was going down a path that I probably couldn't talent-wise or physically make up for. And so it was like the toughest but easiest way to fix this is to switch and to go to a traditional left-hand setup, cross over my top and relearn my bottom. So my feet had to switch. And switching my feet at a time when, at this point I'm 18 and I'm about to leave to go to college. I've already learned the other way. I've got a job. Like I have to, school is becoming more and more important. So I'd missed out on those formative years that I had taught myself to play. And I would taught myself to play, complex, no effects, lag wagon, suicide machines, like really intricate kick pattern stuff.
Right.
And was now having to switch that. And that was incredibly difficult because I had already written so many little things in my head. I even at one point got a left-handed double kick pedal, but was still using my right foot, which was my old kick foot. So I was using the extension to do the drumming, and I had to throw it away and like train myself to start over. So
that's crazy.
Eventually it became a thing where I still don't think that my kick foot is as strong as it could have been had I just stuck the other way. But there became some hybrid level of drummer in there somewhere. But
yeah,
it's weird.
That's crazy. Well, and even thinking to when you first got into drums, like when, most drummers are right-handed. So like, how did you, did you have an influence or someone, like when did you finally see a left-handed drummer? It's like, oh, okay, there's someone I can kind of emulate, because you kind of have to just make it up unless, right?
Yeah, I think that is a left-handed person living in a right-handed world. My kit was stacked up. So it was, kick, floor, rack, snare. And it was like Christmas morning. It's like, here's this thing in your basement. And it was just stacked up, in a, bottom to top.
Right.
And I set it up right-handed because that's all I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
But yet didn't know, but innately started playing open-handed because I'm So like by design, my brain was like, well, this is your rhythm hand. But then I was like, well, why am I not crossing them? You know, so
yeah,
I kind of put myself behind the 8-ball just by setting it up the wrong way and then playing it the way that I thought I should. So had I just crossed it over and set it up the other way from the beginning, it probably wouldn't have been so bad. But I had never seen a kit that way.
right.
I didn't know that was a way to do it. So I didn't quite understand why I was doing that then. Until I realized it was like, oh, well, you set it up the only way you had seen, but you just should have done it the other way. And you probably would have been fine.
Yeah.
But that's at an age when like you don't want to be different to some extent. So I was like, I don't understand why, but I'm not going to ask questions now. Let's just start playing.
Yeah. Do you remember what drummer it was that you finally saw, left-handed drummer?
You know, I don't even realize it, other than just sort of knowing that I had kind of done it wrong from the start, and that all that I did was just set up a right-handed kit and play left-handed on it. And I should have just set up a left-handed kit and played left-handed on it. And I think I'd just gotten enough years into it where I hadn't really seen anyone as much as I physically was seeing its detriment.
Yeah.
And I didn't like how it looked. So I just kind of switched, but then saw, I think the drummer from Further Seems Forever is a lefty.
Yeah.
He's a lefty, but he sets his kit up live. He sets up sideways to the stage.
Okay.
So even as a left-handed drummer, I didn't realize he was left-handed for some amount of years because I just wasn't staring at his setup. He took a left-handed kit, but set it up sideways, so you just kind of were like, oh, you didn't notice.
Right. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, I played left-handed, and you started seeing, I can still watch a left-handed drummer, and it takes me a second to realize that they're left-handed.
Yeah.
Even though I'm left-handed. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Well, it's just not one of those things you see much. Same with left-handed guitarists. Like, I don't know, if I know any of those, in the kind of punk realm. Or even if you see, you're probably just like, oh, it takes you a while, and it's like, oh, that's totally the wrong way, but not the wrong way, but the different way. So, anyways,
for sure.
Well, you seem to pull it off and used to it now, so I guess just one of those kind of growing pains you just have to do. But sweet. Well, yeah, we're going to get into some Cartel questions now, so we're just going to kind of get right to it. So what was the first big opportunity that Cartel got? And big can be whatever in your mind is big. It doesn't necessarily need to mean like, big scene wise, but in your mind, what was kind of your first big opportunity?
I think the first big thing we got was probably direct contact to the owner and operator of Militia Group. Our guitar player, our original guitar player had formed a relationship with some of the guys in Copeland.
Oh yeah.
And through Copeland had met the guy that runs the label. And I think, in as much as you don't want music to be a world like any other job, like, oh, well, my friend needs a job, let's get him a job. That sort of became the connection. It was our first connection. So I still think we earned it on merit. All we did was make an EP and submit it to him as like we know this guy runs a label, we might as well send it to him. And he was like, wow, this is pretty good. Like, could you do more like this? We're like, well, yeah, these are just the first couple songs we've written. And so I think there's a few things. It was, getting in a decent studio and getting a decent sounding first bit of music out there. I think the first thing that we did differently comparative to our other bands was do a professional design, professional layout, professional pressing, where we had done some of the legwork for any label at that time. To all they had to do was just press it more and put their stamp on the back. So we had done a lot of the legwork for any label. So their investment was just at that point probably pressing, physical, and distribution, and any sort of deal in quotes that we were going to sign. So that was probably our first, with our first break. I would say that the tour we did in the winter of 06 was Starting Line and Copeland and a few other bands, and that was a pretty successful tour for us. I think that was right when they were kind of hitting a pretty big mark. So we got in front of a lot of great like-minded fans that were just kind of had heard of us, and I think that was a really big push forward for us. And I think one of the things that people don't realize is you can probably get a label or a recording contract or management. One of the hardest things to get is a booking agent.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand how that game is really significant. The person who puts you on the road and in front of people, especially on the way up to the stratosphere of professional music, you've got to have that. And I think once you have someone in that corner to push you and to kind of align you with certain bands, really starts to kind of get the traction. And then at that point, it all moves so quickly that you aren't quite sure what the one thing was, what the break or the change. All of a sudden, things just, it really happens so fast. Or in my experience, it happens so quickly. And you're kind of like, wow, like, what was it? I don't know. Yeah. It just, all of a sudden, people care. And you're like, oh, crap. I hope we don't let anybody down.
Yeah. Well, when you guys signed to Militia, like, I can't remember exactly what the roster was then, but I do remember thinking that, you guys kind of stood out on your own. Like, I know they had, a band like Rufio that was, more kind of fast tech punk, but there wasn't like a lot. They kind of had more bands like The Beautiful Mistake and Noise Ratchet and kind of more.
Yeah, like, they've done like that. I think they had Copeland, Rufio. It was like Branston. It was Rocket Summer. Appleseed Cast had dropped to them to do a record. They really kind of had a little hodgepodge, and I think we came from that era where Drive Through had obviously come up, and that was back when the label was almost as significant as its roster.
Right.
And so you had Vagrant and you had, Drive Through, and you had all of these sort of little, of course there was Victory and whatever else. But I mean, we saw Militia Group as an opportunity to where no one had really blown up from that label, more or less, which we thought was like a chance, that they had a lot of really close things to break, and that there was a really good core there. And we were like, well, let's go there. I mean, not only that was part of the decision, like we were like, this looks like a good fit, because you didn't want to be the last band to sign to Drive Through. You kind of knew the tide was shifting, but it's like, well, they've already had so much good and heat for so long. Like, you're just going to be following in not the wrong footsteps, but you don't want to be the last person or the runt to that, so to speak. So we were like, let's go to this and be one of the bigger bands on this. Maybe it'll work for us that way. But they were also one of the only labels we were interested in signing with, so it kind of worked out very serendipitously.
Yeah, well, that's a cool way to take it, because, like you said, lots of be like, oh, we got to be on the label, kind of the it label, versus where can we stand out on our own instead of just kind of following in a path. And I mean, it obviously played out well. I remember.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I remember like Chroma doing super well, and when it came out, it was kind of everywhere, and so I think that was a great choice on your part.
Yeah, we saw an opportunity there. I think we not only were one of the only ones that was an option, but we also had really purposely reached out and tried to get that. And I mean, it's kind of like producers, like sometimes a producer has, sometimes they do the 1, 2, 3, or 4 things that truly define them and like get them in the light. And then a lot of people come chasing that light or are drawn to it. And and not to say the magic is gone, but like maybe it's sailed. Maybe that person's on autopilot. Who knows if they're as sharp as they were that created that magic. And you might be going to them for all the wrong reasons at that point. It might be too late. And so you never know. So I think you kind of have to take that into consideration. Like, what is the timeline, or, how long can that last? And do you want to be on the tail end, the beginning, the middle of it, etc.? And I think we timed it right. I think everything worked out the way it could. I mean, acceptance was on Militia. They were already on Columbia at that point. But I think that EP they had before Phantoms came out was on Militia Group. So I mean, we knew we were in good hands and had a good opportunity that had a label that was connected in a roundabout way through distribution to the major label thing. So if you're looking at it like a major league, minor league thing, we were like, this is a really good situation that we think if we get in and do well in, we can probably get taken to the majors pretty quickly. And it's kind of what ended up happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love just all those different correlations and backstory. So that's why, a simple question like a big opportunity can kind of lead to all this cool backstory of, the music industry and how one thing leads to another. And it's crazy. A lot of things can be that big break, but it really ends up being a culmination of so many little breaks that are both planned and by happenstance. And then all of a sudden it just ends up being the story. Yeah. Awesome. What would you say is your favorite Cartel album and why? And do you have any specific memories? I know there's lots of memories tied to each album, but if you had to pick one, what would it be?
I think, I think that our self-titled is probably my favorite. The main reason being is like we were trying. Part of it was knowing that you were trying so hard to match your prior success. Yeah. But I think what I really mean when I say it's my favorite is that the time that, going into Chroma, we were still we were young, and I was still working like 2 jobs, and we were still like, you still weren't quite necessarily a quote unquote professional musician yet,
right?
But by the time it came around to recording our second full length, it was your only job. That was all I had to do, and all we had to do. And so there was really an unabated process in creating, like, whether it was some of a lot of the songs and ideas that Will and Joseph came up with, but then the time that we spent in a rehearsal studio or practice space, just hashing them out and playing them over and over and over again. And I'm that kind of learner or writer. So for my parts, I just have to play it. I think for drummers, you can think of the most instinctual piece to accompany a part of music, but the more you play it with the band, the better the parts become. At least for me, but I felt that way for a lot of the parts and a lot of the songs. So when I say it's my favorite, it's because there were so many little things around it, like That's all we had to do. We got to practice that record the most. We could all track those songs in single takes because by the time we got in the studio, we were so prepared. It doesn't get a lot of love because of the whole band in a bubble thing that surrounded it.
Right.
But if you remove that and you're able to take away some of the stuff that surrounded that record, like I really enjoy the songs. The other part is that was back in a time when even the professionals that we were working with didn't really say no to us. Like you really should have had more people saying, maybe you do this, or maybe you don't do that, or maybe you submit more songs. And I don't necessarily like that structure, but I mean, the first 2.5 albums we wrote, our EP, Into Chroma, into our self-titled record, were literally the first, 37 songs we wrote as a band. It's exactly what we put out. There were no B-sides. There was no unproduced tracks. They were clear, envisioned, like albums. Like that was it. Like
that's really cool.
Everyone's like, well, what songs didn't make Chroma? And I'm like, those are the only songs we wrote. It's kind of the same thing it was for our self-titled record. So the process of it, the songs, like just that moment in time was super unique, I think, and probably my favorite from some of the songs, from the way it was written, from the way it was recorded. Like all that makes it my favorite. Yeah,
well, that's really cool because I kind of assumed just from different things, I've read over the years about that experience, that it wouldn't have stood up that much. So for those that don't know kind of the whole band, the bubble thing, you can go look that up on Wikipedia or something. It was a pretty cool thing, especially back then. But at the same time, I think it kind of came with a lot of scrutiny and all that kind of stuff. But so besides what you just shared, if you kind of have one memory from that period, kind of whether good or bad, what would that be? Like, is there anything like, did you like drink obscene amounts of Dr. Pepper or, anything just kind of like random that was kind of goofy or something that stood out?
I mean, that whole process was incredibly enlightening from how TV is produced to the amount of money that gets thrown around, and not to the bands at all, but just like sponsorship dollars and these big projects and the cost and the logistics. You learn a lot about that thing. I think one of the coolest things for me personally was that the pier that they built the bubble on was Pier 54 in New York, and that was owned by White Star Lines, which was the company that ran the Titanic, the Britannic, and the Olympic. Wow. And that was where the Titanic was supposed to dock. And it's where the Lusitania actually docked and released the survivors on that pier. And when you drive up to that pier, you can still see the wrought iron metalwork in the front of it. Still says White Star Lines on it, which has nothing to do with music, but I was such a Titanic fan in terms of like an engineering and like just, it was one of those things I read about as a kid before the whole movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet came out. I was just enamored with that. So it was kind of cool to have something professional in my life be associated to that in a way.
Yeah.
I think being alone on the end of that pier on the Hudson River by yourself with your childhood best friends, staring out at like the Empire State Building and just going like, we grew up in like rural Georgia. Like, what are we doing here? It was those nights when you were by yourself that you're like, what? Like, this is everyone else's jobs. Like, we're just having fun. What the fuck is going on? It just was so weird. But I can say that when you're faced with an opportunity like that, when you're in the quote unquote major leagues or whatever you want to call it, you are battling the pinnacle of modern music, and you are always trying to chase a success or a high or whatever it is, to be bigger and better than the day, month, or, album year or whatever you want to call it before.
Yeah.
And when you're faced, when given that opportunity, you kind of have to take them, and you realize, you know what? I don't know if we have an opportunity to say no to this opportunity. We have to just sort of take it in stride and go with it. I think, so that was where, like, okay, let's give it a go. I think, in the end, what probably played more to its disconnect is we are a comedy. We as a group, as a friendship, as a band, we're funny guys. We're lighthearted. We're not dramatic. They wanted a drama, and that's not who we are. If they would have sold it as a comedy, it probably would have landed more,
right.
And not seem so trite. But again, like, I can always say for the rest of my life, remember that one time me and my best friends had a TV show on MTV, like in my mid-20s, like, what a cool time. So
yeah, is that on like YouTube or anything? Like, can you go on?
Yeah, if you go to YouTube and you Google, not Google, but if you search like Band in a Bubble, it'll come up with like best of highlights. There's like best of day one and best of week one, and honestly, watching those is better than watching anything else because they're just as entertaining. And you sort of see what I'm talking about with how lighthearted and silly and funny we are. Because, I mean, like, how would you not be? We were never like the artistic band, like, woe is me, like, my troubles are so troubled that I've got to write about it. That was never really us. Like,
yeah.
We had very safe upbringings, like we have good families and good opportunity and good heads on our shoulders, and we got very lucky by taking some risks. So, like, there's really not a lot of drama for us, and so we just had the most fun doing anything we ever did. So, but yeah, dude, what a time.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go tomorrow and look that up because it's been a long time.
Dude, look it up. It's silly as hell, but I mean, it's so crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, moving on. What's your favorite headline tour that Cartel did? Who were the openers, and why does that tour stand out?
Probably the tour we did. It was us. So it was Cartel, Boys Like Girls. What's the band? I'm spacing out. With the guy from Midtown. They wore a bunch of purple.
Cobra Starship? Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. You can tell I'm getting a little older.
Yeah.
That tour was probably the most fun. I think just like with the crew that was on it. I think from a headlining perspective, that was our favorite.
Awesome. And what about favorite support? So I'm sure you did a lot of support tours over the years.
I'll have to kind of lump a little bit together because I'll say it was like the support year. So in 2006 was probably one of our busiest years, and I can't believe it was 14 years ago, which is absolutely stupid. But we did the Starting Line tour in the winter, and then we did Warped Tour that summer.
Oh, nice.
And then that fall we did a Newfound Glory tour. And Newfound Glory, like I said before, was kind of always a big influence for us. And to get a tour with them, we toured with them at a time where we probably could have headlined, but we just wanted to tour them so bad that we didn't care. And we didn't care what they paid us. We were just like, I don't give a shit. And it was just so fun to kind of be equals with them, on the same level, and just kind of, have fun with them as friends and to befriend them. And they were so genuine and kind and accepting of us. So, and we got along great. So, like, I would just say that year was kind of one of those ones you write a book about, because it was just, I think we were gone like 290 days or something out of the year.
Crazy. Like,
it was just one of those years where you didn't sleep in your bed, but it didn't matter because so much was happening, so much was changing. There was just so much amazing things happening.
Yeah, and were you noticing, like, from one tour to the next, just a growing fan base, or what kind of things were you noticing?
Oh yeah, it was in that year specifically. It was crazy because I mean, like, you know, I think one other thing that people don't realize is how planned out a year can be. So, for example, I mean, like in the fall of one year, you probably know what you're doing for the following 3 seasons.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing in that late winter, spring. You know what you're doing in summer, and you know what you're doing in the fall of the next year. And I think one of the things that you can't predict when you're booking those things is what level of success, at least on the way up to the apex, like where you're going to be, what your value is going to be, what your draw is going to be. So they're really hard to predict. And, we started at one level and then ended on another. Yes, to your question, that we all the way through that year, I think specifically on Warped Tour that year, we had on the Ernie Ball stage, which is kind of one of the smaller, less impressive stages, if you will, in terms of its size and glamour and location. And it's kind of meant for smaller up and coming bands. And that year in 2006, the 3 bands on that at any given time was Cartel, Mute Math, and Gym Class Heroes.
Oh, cool.
And again, like, they put it kind of, off the beaten path, and you would see these crowds form on a stage that it was intended for 100, and there'd be thousands.
Yeah,
and it was awesome. Almost like, what the hell's going on? And no one could kind of like understand it. And we just went up there and you got 30 minutes, and we're like, watch this. And we would just play our little hearts out.
Yeah. So did they ever like move you up to a stage, or you just did the whole summer on that? And
no. And there's a crazy reason why. So like in that year, and with most Warped Tours, they're obviously capable of seeing that type of demand and growth for a band. And it does benefit the tour more to kind of move things around, and you can totally get bumped up to a different stage. However, we had basically signed up with Ernie Ball in a way that was sort of a contractual, non-contractual like agreement where they basically paid for our food. So you get a meal ticket, kind of thing, and you get scanned for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And kind of by them buying our food was kind of like a binding contract in a way that we couldn't be taken off that stage. As I've been told, or as we understood it in that time.
Yeah.
As sort of a reason why we couldn't be taken off, because it's like, well, they kind of have you. And those are things that, like, something in a management should have caught and reworked. But I mean, you just go through the motions and you just get through it.
Yeah. Well, and there's something cool about just sticking with it, just knowing like, we're gonna pack this out and kind of blow everyone away and catch people off guard, and right, because main stage is like, okay, with main stage, people are gonna be there, but I'm sure there was something cool about like, okay, how many people are gonna be here in this city, and just seeing that.
Yeah, they kind of positioned you on kind of proving anyone wrong if it came down to it.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So kind of moving back to talking drums a bit, I'd love to hear what's your most memorable drum endorsement. So even if you want to talk about, what kind of drum endorsements you had, and when, did one stand out over another? That's one.
I mean, I grew up, I had a Pearl and loved Pearls growing up, and I ended up, so here's a crazy story. So the of militia group had grown up in the United States in Kansas City. And one of his friends was Jake Cardwell. Well, Jake Cardwell's dad is Bill, who owns CNC Drums.
Cool.
So when we were just kind of hitting the road, of course, through the label, they're like, we can get you a hookup on CNC. and it was going to be my first custom kit. And of course, this is coming out of the Orange County era of custom drums.
Yeah.
So I really had drawn up this pretty elaborate design of a kit. And I remember ordering it, and it came with like the wrong hoops.
Oh, no.
And like the bass hoops were broken. And, like it was one of those things where like I had done the math on all of the ratios, on all the sizes of all the stripes so that everything was mathematically correct. And it was kind of like, thanks for your order. We'll have it processed and out to you in, whatever days. And that's not a knock on Bill or Jake or CNC as a whole. I had probably square peg round hole a little bit. Like I probably, if I had ordered a really beautiful wood grain kit from them, it probably would have been absolutely perfect. And I love their drums.
Yeah.
It was just a really funny, it was just a really funny thing that happened where I was like, what the hell is this? And the kit was beautiful. It ended up being the way that it came was actually probably for the best. So it was a really good thing. And then I ended up meeting through my great friend Andrew Cook from the receiving end of Sirens. They were out of Massachusetts, and that's kind of how I met. And I think SJC only had maybe seven people on their roster at that time.
Oh, wow. So they're pretty new. Oh, I lost you there for a second.
And we're back.
Okay.
That was I hooked up with them very early on, SJC, and they were making drums out of Mike's grandmother's basement and really small operation. But again, I kind of related to their, I think I had spent time in my own house, hoping to build and create my own drum company, and they were actually doing it. So no matter like the craft or the quality, I just liked them as a group trying to make drums for anyone they could, as crazy as they could get and as fast as they could get them out. And it was fun to grow with them as they grew. And so like I really, really loved that endorsement. Did it come with any hookups and perks? Absolutely not. Like they were a small company, but I think that's just where I wanted to be. So like being offered free drums and just supporting good people, I just took the road that I aligned to the most. And that was it. And then, I ended up getting a vinyl endorsement.
Oh yeah.
And I had come across vinyl cymbals through the drummer of Acceptance. I'd never really seen him or played them, and he was playing them at the time. And I loved them. And they were like, yeah, dude, we'll give you a deal. And I was like, fantastic. And we were longtime partners. So, yeah, I think anytime that a cymbal package would show up at my house, it was hard not to. It was really crazy. It would show up, and I would do the math, and I'd think about how much I was being given. And I would think about how hard I had to work as a kid to get one cymbal, let alone a box.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it just blew me away because I was like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. So how many SJC kits did you end up getting kind of over the years?
I went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
No, 6. 6 kits.
Wow. Do you still have all those kits?
I do not. I only have one.
Oh, like you just kind of sold them off or whatever after?
Yeah, so I got the first kit I ordered through them was really elaborate, and they were trying to do lacquer kits in the winter, and they couldn't get the lacquer to cure correctly. And so the kit kind of started to disassemble and separate. And they were like, look, let's just go ahead and swap for something like this, et cetera, et cetera. So we swapped it out. And then for some reason, and I really can't say why, I don't get as like attached to my drums as I should. I think designing them is one thing, and then I play them, and then I'm like ready for the next one. Now, if you were like, hey, do you have all the cars you've ever owned? I'm like, all but one. Like, I can't sell a car to save my life. I love them all. I want to keep them all. I want to collect all of them. I don't want anyone else to have them. I don't know why I feel that way.
Yeah.
And and it's really strange. But I don't think I ever want a room just stacked full of drums because I can only play one kit at a time.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I had a buddy in town in Georgia, in Atlanta, that like was trying to run like a consignment company for drums, and he was really connected with SJC. And I was like, dude, like I need to sell these kits as much as you're trying to get a name for yourself. So let's team up. And he helped me like get rid of a few. Long story long, I was in Nashville about a year or two ago, and a buddy of mine comes up to me who was from Georgia, who had just moved to Nashville, and he goes, do you remember that orange acrylic kit you had that was like a John Bonham kit? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, I bought that. And I was like,
awesome.
What? So like to run into a person randomly at a house party that like owns one of my old drum sets was crazy.
Yeah.
You know, or the kit that I recorded Chroma on, I sold to a guy that grew up like in the town beside me. And then he sold it to some guy who found me on Facebook and was like, this your old kit? I was like, yep, that's me. He's like, cool. And I was like, what the hell? Like, what?
Yeah, well, I
just sold the kit that I had made for the Band in the Bubble stuff. Like, I just sold that to a friend who has, like, kind of been close around the band for some years. And he was like, I was like, here you go. And he's like, I didn't know you, like, used this on this tour and this stage and this thing. Like, there's photos of it everywhere. And I was like, well, yeah, man, I played the hell out of it. And he's like, you sure you want to sell this? I was like, sure, man, go for it. It's yours now. He's like, what?
Yeah, that's amazing.
I think they give more joy out that. I don't know. Like, I think someone might have more joy playing that kit, you know, in a new life kind of way than like I would. Like, for me to walk into a room and see them all lined up, like they're in my brain. Like I have them. Like they're stored in me somewhere. Like, so I don't think I need them collected, as well as. I definitely can't afford to have like $14,000 in drums just stacked up in the corner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's that part of it where it's like, well, you know, life is still expensive, but I love that. I mean, that's so cool to pass on those memories, and it's like, you know what, I use this and got joy out of it, and I'll give it to someone else, and you know, stuff is only stuff, right? Like the memories.
It really is. I have the one kit, the last kit that I ever got from SJC, I still have. And it was by far, I think, my most favorite, you know, from the gentleman that kind of sold it to me and worked with on it. He and I work together now, Brian Rushton. He's a part of the bar and owner of the bar that I work at. You know, he helped sell me that kit. Josh, you know, one of their builders that passed away last year, built that kit. So that one, I think that's the one that, like, I've gotten more compliments on people being like, hey, man, that drum set sounds great. I also just hit the shit out of it. But that one I'll probably keep. It's the one I have now, and it's the one I've had the longest. So I think I'll keep that one.
Yeah, what's the look of that one?
Series.
Oh, sorry.
You're all right. My parents, I was graduating high school. My parents were like, do you want a laptop for college? And I was like, no, I want a drum set. And they got me a DW, like just 3 pieces, like no snare. And I still have that kit at my house right now. So that's the one that I hold on to the most. Like that one is sentimental to me. But the rest I think just kind of belong to everyone.
Yeah. What's the, so you just cut out there for a second, so I don't think you heard about, what's the look of the SJC kit you have right now?
So growing up in Georgia, like especially like around my grandparents' house, there was a ton of pecan trees. And so I hit up, you know, the guys at SJC and I was like, can you find me a pecan veneer? And they're like, totally. And so they found this wood that, you know, when you look at like a stained, you know, satin kit, it's just regular clean wood.
Yeah. But
this has like a texture and almost like a scaliness to it, almost like a reptile kind of thing. There's just so much grain and texture that it just looks so different. And so there was like a history there of just kind of trying to like pay homage to like my grandparents and like my history and just some of that time in my life, like thinking of them and where I grew up and trying to turn that into like a drum memory and it just came out as like, it was when I kind of realized that I had every size drum in the world, and I finally like got it right. I was like, these are my numbers, and this is my look, and this is my style, and this I think is me. And I think it's aged incredibly well. I think it looks beautiful, just as it did then as it does now, and I think it's perfect.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So when you're on tour, there's a lot of driving, and so I'd love to hear if you have any kind of standout memories from driving and any go-to records that you would listen to when you were the driver.
I remember we started a tour in Atlanta once, or we hopped on a tour in Atlanta, and for some reason it had snowed as we headed to Florida.
Oh wow!
And I'm the driver, like car guy of the group. So I was like, all right, like I can do this. And so like every time it was like snowy weather, it was like, you drive. I was like, okay. And I mean, we were driving through like Colorado, Wyoming or something at one point, and it was snowing, and we hit like a 6% downgrade thing.
Yeah.
And we stopped like towards the top of it, and I was like, are we really about to go down this? And they're like, it'd be fine. So, I mean, like I was driving this van and trailer, like with 2 feet, I was like gear shifting from like lows and high gears, like engaging and disengaging the traction control to be able to spin the wheels so fast to burn through the snow to even hit the pavement. Like it was a very harrowing experience, but I was like, boom, nailed it.
Awesome.
We used to hit those, you'd go down to like a construction area and you're like, hey, just tap one of those barrels and you'd send one. When we first started touring, like you would just play pranks on all the other bands that were driving like to other shows with you. So we used to like fill condoms take a condom and like fill it up with like mayonnaise, relish, and like mustard
nasty.
from like a gas station.
Yeah.
And then you'd pour like Mountain Dew into it and then twist it and throw it out the window, and it just hit their windshield and explode. Like,
oh man, that's nasty.
Like, what the hell are we thinking? Honestly, yeah, the driving's the craziest part of any of the really like startup touring stuff. And even now, like, I don't think I can drive more than 4 hours, or else I want to die. I hate driving. Nashville to my hometown is like 3 hours and 45 minutes, and it might as well be 21 hours. Like I can't.
Oh, see, that's part that I miss because I love just being on the road and listening to music. But yeah, it's another part that lots of people don't really think about with bands. It's like they just think about going to see them play live. They don't realize they've been sitting in a van for 8 hours every day for however many days or however many hours, right? Like it's really.
Imagine getting up and going on a vacation every single day. Now, it's not always necessarily about the destination, but the journey was part of that. And you'd be sitting there in a van, either sleeping. And all of this was kind of, 10, 15 years ago. So, we didn't have the phones that we have now. We didn't have the technology that we have. We would have to have a tape adapter that could plug into a laptop and play DVDs if we wanted to like watch a movie.
Right.
So the technology lends itself to be a little more comfortable now than then. And, even reading can make you dizzy, or if the road's bad, you can't read well. There's not really a lot to do. And some of those drives, when you head out to the West, the days that you have off are only off days so that you can drive.
Right.
And it's just time, and there's nothing you can do but just sit there. And I think when you end up wasting enough time, you start going, I don't, how much time have I got to waste? Like, I'm not getting any younger. So
yeah, that's
it's kind of crazy.
Well, what were some of your favorite go-to records when you were driving, or did you just kind of shuffle it, or what was I?
I listened to Phantoms a lot. I listened to Say Anything Is a Real Boy or whatever, a whole bunch.
Yeah.
I listened, or Is a Boy, I listened to a lot of Bon Jovi.
Okay. Well, you need those anthems to keep you going all night.
Yeah. I think the longest stint I ever did was like 10 or 11 hours of driving straight. And I was just listening to like Andrew WK.
Oh, yeah.
And
so
like
good.
any like anthem that I could. It was always just like some sort of like power ballad. And I was just like, let's go. And I would just get jacked.
Oh, that's awesome. Were there any bands that Cartel never got to play with or tour with that you hoped you would have, and who was that?
Yeah, I think Jimmy Eat World is probably one of those bands I wish we could have played with. I think that we had such a, I just think that we probably could have created a set that really meshed with their sound and their set.
Yep.
And we've played shows with them, or I've played shows with them and other bands, but it's one that I wish we would have gotten like an 8-week tour on, just a really long run to kind of to see them. There's a lot of the times when you really got to tour with a band that you admired or liked or enjoyed was that you got to see them, 40 something times.
Yeah.
Like we got to see Acceptance play Phantoms, 40 times.
Oh,
like,
man, that would be
holy
awesome.
crap. You know what I mean? Like I got to see, some of the best bands play their best songs, more than their biggest fans. And I think that's kind of one of the coolest parts about it is when you really hit those. And I know that Jimmy Eat World would have been the one that I can say without a doubt, we would have just every night I would have watched them and lost it.
Yeah. What was there? Did it come close at all, or was it just kind of two different worlds at that time? Or
I think I remember at some point there was like some talks, like our name was in a hat at some point. I think at a certain point when you kind of are drawing the same fans or requesting the same amount of money, then there's parts of it where like, well, we want to headline our own shows because we want to have our own production. Like we want to play our performance. And so at a certain point, like the ship sails to some extent.
Yeah.
And you realize that because you're like, well, we kind of have a crew to feed now, and you have more people that you look out for. So, you kind of know that the dollars and cents and the politics aren't going to allow that show to happen. So you kind of just accept it.
Yeah. What's one of the craziest things that happened while on stage playing? Anything major go wrong, or did someone play a prank on you while drumming?
We have a few songs that are a 3 count. And I miscounted the wrong song once. And it's so funny to hear 3 musicians play one song and have the drummer play a completely different song.
Yeah.
And you all are playing with like such intensity for about 3 or 4 seconds, but it sounds like an eternity. And all I did was immediately like stand up and like look at the monitor guy, like blaming it on him, and just started pointing to stuff. And I think the band like knew what had happened, and they were like looking over there too, and kind of like backed me up. And then I was like, I did like the okay symbol, and then we started off and played it again.
Yeah, well, that's awesome.
Yeah, honestly, in all of our times of playing, I think that's probably one of the worst mistakes. And it was like kind of later on in our career. I remember we played a show. I forget what had happened, but like we were pissed, and we were going into Canada. I don't know. I forget what city it was. I think you were just having one of those bad days, and all of us felt it. And we were like, we were angry. I felt anger, but I don't know what we were mad about or mad at. And we were in the dressing room. We're like, man, fuck. And just a low day.
Yeah.
And we all just got super fucking stoned. And we were like, kind of just like screw it, like stone our head, whatever. And we went out on stage, and the crowd was fantastic, but we kind of weren't playing for them at that point. Like, we just wanted to, like, I think each of us played that one show, like, for themselves. Like, it was like, you know what, I was like, and I'm the drummer, so I'm in the back, and it's like, no one really cares about me. But I probably played that entire set with like my eyes closed. And it was probably, you're in a room full of probably 1,500 people, and there could have been one person there for all we knew. We just kind of played like we were at a rehearsal space. And I don't know if we played a tighter show than that day.
Wow. That's cool.
We got off, and everyone was like, you guys just ripped. And it was just one of those like cathartic performances that, you know, you don't know when or why that might happen.
Yeah.
But sometimes you know, and you understand as a drummer, like, you know, you can have a pretty bad day, but once you hit rocks and drums, like, it's hard not to be pretty stoked on life. And we just played it out that day. And the crowd was just kind of like, holy shit, what the hell just happened? Like, are those guys okay? Because that set was dope.
Literally.
And I'll never forget that. There was one thing that happened in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. So a weird thing that Cartel used to do was we used to try to like play in different scenarios during practice. So we would play our set normal, and then we would play our set drunk. We'd all go get lunch and get hammered, and then come back and play our set. And then we'd play it again in the dark.
Wow. And
kind of part of the point was you'd kind of be prepared for any situation.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
But it really is kind of a way to mix it up on yourselves and have fun. Well, there was a show in Jacksonville Beach. I think we were playing with Hey Monday. And we played, and we were co-headlining, and Hey Monday went on stage. And we're sitting there and we're watching, and Cassidy goes, "Did you guys notice that the lights went out during Cartel's set for 3 minutes and they didn't miss a note?"
Wow.
And I looked over at Will, and I said, "The lights went out?" And he goes, "You didn't notice?" I said, "Not at all."
Wow. Well, I guess that's how you practice those things.
So we literally like just played in the dark, and there wasn't a single light on, and we just ripped.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good way to challenge yourself.
Shit.
Yeah,
it was just one of those things. Like, I mean, like, we didn't do it a ton, but there were times that we would it wound up being the thing, and we would just do it. And yeah, that one day, I don't remember the lights going off. I don't remember it being dark. I don't remember playing the song. I just was like, oh, okay, because you were like, you're on that much of like muscle memory, autopilot. Like, you almost can't miss, you know?
Yeah, no, that's rad. So you alluded to this a little bit with the band in the bubble and just with like booking managers and stuff, but what would you say is kind of the biggest music industry letdown or frustration that you guys had to deal with?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. Like, I think some of the frustration is sort of how much influence a booking agent can have. You know, they might press some of their stresses onto you. Like, well, I can't get band submissions. Like, I can't get people to submit for your tours because you don't have a full length. Or I can't submit you for tours because you don't have any new music. I need an EP. And you started to kind of like, you started to kind of formulate your career and the moves you made based on what this person needed to do their job.
Right.
And then every time you fulfilled it, it was like, oh, just kidding, I need something else. You're like, that was a year of our lives. Like, you like, what? So yeah, I think that misconception of how hard it is to get booking and how important of a role they play is one thing. I think one of the things I truly hate is kind of what we talked about with endorsements. How come is it the person that has the money to buy the stuff doesn't have to pay for it?
Right.
You know, and it's not to say that, you know, it makes sense. The economics of it all makes sense to me. But I used to, like I said, I'd look down at this box of stuff, and I'm like, I mean, is it a dues paid thing? Like, did I buy enough cymbals to earn free cymbals? You know, like,
yeah.
Is it a qualification thing? Like, I don't know, but I wish that there was some better way to aid or support. I mean, music equipment's not cheap.
Oh man.
And I mean, you know, I mean, as a drummer, you know, and even Will, Senior Cartel, like, came to me at one point recently, and he was like, "Drums are expensive." I said, "Yes." I said, "You've got a drum set that's thousands." I said, "You have cymbals that are thousands. You have stands that are about 1,000. You've got accompanying stand, like you've got cases, you've got heads, you've got sticks that do not last. So those are waste." You know, I was like, all that, and then to tour, I've got to have backups to the backup.
Right.
So like, I was like, yeah, I mean, my traveling rig was anywhere from probably 10, 12, 15 grand at any given time of stuff. And I mean, yeah, I remember working 2 jobs and sleeping in like the car that I had at the time to kind of be at work early enough to just keep going, to buy stuff, to support myself. And I remember thinking, you know, I used to work so hard for this, and now you'll just give it to me. And I just remember being like conflicted. You know, I didn't know how to process that sometimes. As like I said, is it something that I earned? Like, are my dues paid or whatever I did? But I do wish that there was some way to subsidize or create something for people to get, you know, and not just like, I don't know, not crap equipment, like good equipment. You know, like, you know, like give them the Gibson SG, not the Epiphone. Like, let's get them with, like, I don't know. But I think that's one of those things of the music business that I think the other thing that I hate, which is a lot more big picture, is that of the arts, music is one of the ones that has the smallest window for creativity for a brand. You know, you look at any artist or group you've experienced and gone through, and, you know, they have an opportunity to pop up at a time in your life that coincides with a time in their life to give you maybe 4 years of attention. Yeah. And after that, if you haven't eclipsed into one of the biggest acts in the world, then you are relegated to, you know, mundaneness after some time. And, you know, you're often pigeonholed into a comparison of what people consider your best work. And I think I've been there. You know, I've been a fan of a band and be like, doesn't sound like their first record, you know, and that sucks to say, you know, but I think there's a really harsh judgment, or just a really small window that we give, you know, these great individuals, you know, a time to succeed, be their best, or accept their work. And I think that's kind of weird, but it just kind of is. I mean, like, that's how music becomes a soundtrack to your life, and then it becomes a soundtrack to someone else's, and a soundtrack to someone else's. It kind of always has been and always will be.
Yeah, I definitely think it's one of the arts that has kind of the most pressure on it, and people have the most, maybe just for me because I'm a music fan, you know, just kind of the most weight on it. I don't know if, you know, painters or poets or, you know, any of those other ones, if they feel that same thing, maybe those fans of that kind of art are more forgiving. But yeah, totally right. I mean, with that.
You can paint for decades, and then you can enter into your blue period or wherever you want. You know, all of a sudden you've changed everything about how you do, and oh my God, it's even crazier than before. And you're like, it's what? Like, how come? What? You know, or architecture. You know, you can take a time and there's you know, mid-century modern, and then all of a sudden you can go into all these other dimensions with it, and it's crazy. And then you get into music, and it's one of the most special ones, and it just evolves so much, and it's such an interesting thing that we've created as human beings. It's mind-blowing.
What's the best friendship that you've made with a non-cartel band member? So do you have, like, kind of over the years, is there another guy from another band that you kind of really grew close to, someone that you would kind of still consider a good friend?
Oh my God, I think there's so
lots.
many. There's lots, and I think one of the what's been one of the most beneficial parts of moving to Nashville is how many people from the world that Cartel existed in have ended up here.
Yeah.
And sometimes you look back on a tour and you go, man, we're so close with that band, right? And then all of a sudden, 12 years later, you see these people in person and you're like, are we friends or were we just buds that for that 8-week period, that one time,
Yeah.
you know? And so you find yourself going, well, I know that we know each other, but we both know that we don't know each other. And here you are in the same city and under different circumstances, like you're no longer in the band, and my band's no longer, aggressively active. And here we are, just two guys doing something different now with our time than before, knowing that we have this thread in common that no one can take away. And so you kind of get to reinvestigate and re-meet and reconvene. And like that discovery has been a lot of fun, because there's probably too many people to single out in terms of people that you really connected with and might get a birthday call from, or a text, or see when they come through town, or visit other band visits and you still get to see them. So, like I felt most connected to probably the Trios guys, Receiving and a Siren guys, and the As Tall as Lion guys, and just some of those earlier bands you feel really connected to, because in some way, shape, or form, you're in the middle of the, oh, well, if your friends jumped off the bridge, are you going to jump with them kind of phase of it, where you've just quit college, moved back in with your parents. When the risk feels the biggest, you look at people beside you and go, you're doing the same thing I'm doing. You have just as much to lose, and that's why they're so important in that time. So that's a cool time where you're probably the most susceptible to those friendships. But I mean, like, I think we bonded with like Starting Line and New Found Glory, probably the most. But I mean, I love the Boys Like Girls guys, and I love every band we got to tour with and meet. And you still get to see and talk to and experience so many of those people.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So you've touched on a little bit of this too. When you look back at all of the years of playing in Cartel, what kind of, gives you the biggest feels, whether it's, different emotions or things that stand out? I mean, you mentioned about the Titanic story, which is really cool. What are kind of a few other things that, that you would kind of like take with you?
I mean, I think I look at it and just love that, the same guys that you dreamt it up with were the same guys you got to do it with, and you all had to do so much to make it happen.
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate that we had so many professional individuals that took chances, risk, that worked, that spent time from their families or their loved ones to invest their energy into the same thing that I was trying to do. It's such a strange world, but it's so cool to get in and kind of get out, because it's really fickle and it's slippery. And to be honest, like, no one knows what they're fucking doing. No one knows.
Yeah, that's true.
It's everyone's best guess. And for some people have a lot more to lose than others. And I never felt that we had anything to lose. And I think, looking around and having childhood friends is probably what kept you the closest to being sane, that kept your ego at bay, that kept you in check, because they knew you, and you couldn't pull a fast one over. I wouldn't change a single thing that we did or chose to do or opportunity we got. Like, I look at it all so fondly and appreciative of everything we were given and got to experience. It was I mean, what a crazy little ride. I feel so fortunate to really be unscathed, to be honest, because if you really get too much bigger, there's really no coming back.
Right.
I feel like if you were to have to transition out of that life, it's going to be more difficult. If you get even bigger, you're hoping that you make a lifetime of retirement money because the world will treat you different or know of you differently. And that's tough to live with forever, So
yeah.
I remember another kind of little story was I remember we went to the VMAs one year, and I'm literally in a circle. Like, it's me, one of the guys from Cartel, I think it's Tom DeLonge, Newfound Glory, I forget, and maybe one other, like, I think the guys from Good Charlotte. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just staring at it, and I'm like, what the hell are we doing here? Like, you kind of look around, and I'm like, oh, there's Paris Hilton. I was like, wow, she's even hotter in person. Like, this is crazy. Like, and you're just going, like, again, it's one of those moments where you just zone out and, like, think of the back roads you took to school.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Like, you just kind of pinch yourself and go, everything's changed, and you realize that you're flying awfully close to the sun.
Yeah.
And you really have to juggle how close you want to get. Because if you get much, much bigger, you're never going to come back. And it's a burn you get to live with forever. And it might influence you from a money standpoint or a success standpoint. And those are very, very dark things to struggle and deal with and accept. And you never sometimes can get enough of it. The more success you get, the more success you want. The more money you get, the more money you want.
Yeah.
It's kind of a lack of satisfaction. And again, we only touched on some of those emotions where I was like, okay, enough for me to see and understand and compartmentalize the difference in the way I was feeling,
right,
or the difference in the way the world reacted to me or treated my friends and I, stuff like that. They're like, let me carry your stuff. And I'm like, I can carry my drums. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like a functioning adult, like, I don't want to be like Mariah Carey where, like, you can't go out in the street or any pop star where they can't live a life. Like,
right.
I just don't think it's ever worth that. And so, I think I got as much as my childhood dreams could digest.
Yeah.
And it was enough to go, you did it. You did it with the guys you love. You did it safely. Cool. Like, because it really feels like a giant bet. You're literally at the table going, black. Let's put it all on black.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that we walked away with all of our chips, just kind of looking at each other going, oh man.
That's awesome, man. Well, that's lots of great thoughts in there, and a good place to wrap up. And maybe sure. There isn't anything for this last question, but if you could do only one more thing with Cartel, what would it be? So assuming there's no COVID or anything, like,
sure.
If there is,
I think the thing that I've always loved most is nothing we've done has felt pressured, or felt forced, or felt like undesired. Every time that we needed time off the road to write, it was the time that we needed. Every time a record came out is because it's what we wanted to write. We had the songs, we had the material, we had the influence. And I think that kind of by being able to put everything on the shelf, and take a little step back from it and kind of invest energy and time in other interests, it kind of only gives you more appreciation for what, all of that is.
Yeah.
And I think what it does is sets you up for what might be next naturally. And so if something comes along, and if it's a few shows a year, like, I think we're in a safe place to do that. If it's some extra music, sure. If it's couple tours or a tour or something. Like I think whatever might present itself is going to be the next right thing. And you know what I mean? Like it's just going to be, it'll make sense. I don't think that we're trying to, I don't want to say beat a dead horse, but you know, like I don't think we're trying to make something of what's left. Like, oh, we only have this much in the tank, better gas it. Like, no, I think if opportunities were to arise, it'd be because we all are kind of intrigued by, well, you guys want to get in the room together and see what happens? Like that kind of thing. Yeah. So I think that we're in the best place we could be for the next natural thing that would be the next thing we want to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, man, I really have enjoyed this conversation and just appreciate all your insights and the stories and looking back. I mean, it's just cool to me. You know, I can still remember where I was when I heard Chroma for the first time and kind of, you know, following you along the journey with Band in a Bubble and, you know, even, you know, up until when I saw you guys a number of years ago. And so, yeah, this has been great. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on here.
Of course, it's my time, my pleasure. Again, I think anytime you get a chance to kind of to talk about it, you gain an extra level of understanding and appreciation for kind of, you know, all that it entails.
Yeah, and I love that. And I mean, that's one, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. Like I know Will's been on a few podcasts, and you know, lots of times maybe the typical band person does the interviews, but I wanted to make sure and, you know, talk to someone, you know, especially a drummer too, and because there's just lots of different kind of insight and stuff. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Aaron, my pleasure.
Shit. Thought we had everybody. Keep the target painted.